Hello and welcome to the Little Knowledge podcast, where this time we're going to do something we haven't really done before. Usually we go to a house, giggle at things, and then run away again. This time, however, we're going to follow the story of one family all the way from its origins, really in legend, all the way up to 1962 when it all ended. At least that's the theory. It might take 3 episodes or so, we're not sure. But really, it's stuff we talk about in the pub anyway. So this episode could go in any direction, really. All kinds of tangents. Now, the Busbys have not made a great mark on the history of Wales, it has to be said. But luckily, we have a Morgan with us to talk about Morgans. And what could be more fitting? We have with us, as always, Goff Morgan. Hello, Goff.
Hello. Hello. Greetings to you, everybody. Hope you're all having a lovely January.
I guess it's possible.
Actually, it's not January. It's February. We've skipped January. I was asleep for most of January, I'm afraid. Hibernating, yeah. So I'm still thinking this out. So, hope the start of the year has been well. That's what I was attempting to say.
Yeah. Well, it's this is odd, isn't it? Talking about the Morgans, I think it will be odd.
Yeah. Well, it's such a big topic for us, particularly because of a very long association with the Morgans and their property at Tredegar House, etc. So yeah, it'd be an interesting one because there's such a lot. And you said you're right. You know, the origins of the family are remote. They really are very, very distant, particularly in this part of the world. So it'd be quite interesting in the first of our blockbuster trilogy, to focus on some of those obscure little origin things and the very early history of the house, which I think is what we're hoping to do in this wee ramble.
Oh yeah, we're getting nowhere near red brick or anything that modern.
Oh no,
on this one. But as far as you mentioned origins, and some people say that the Morgan family were descended from Caractacus, which Caradog has popped up with Dunraven Castle, if you remember, and St. Donat's in that part of the world. That was his sort of realm.
Yeah.
Some say Brutus, the conqueror of Britain, when there were giants all over the place, they claimed ancestry from him. But of course, we got to get biblical, haven't we, Goff? And what is the other one? You get what you pay for with Welsh bards, and they did trace the Morgans all the way back, step by step, to
Ham, the second son of Noah.
Oh, there he is.
Potentially the very, very first Morgan. Look in that first suit is the best way to describe it there, isn't it? Yeah.
All I say, Goff, if we compare beards...
Yeah. Oh, I shouldn't have let it go for the full biblical patriarch look, shouldn't I? As opposed to keeping it tied up. Yeah. All I would say to you is unless you're of a robust mentality, don't read Ham's Wikipedia entry because it certainly made our hair curl.
That was a shock, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm not even you can't even say it out loud.
Well, that was done by a Welsh.
It was the tradition of genealogies at the time, though, to actually, go right back to Adam, even, So the fact that they quit at the second son of Noah is not is probably a step in the right direction, shall we say?
They have the greatest family tree that money could buy. I think it's safe to say.
Yeah,
what you pay for with Welsh bards.
Yeah. So but that was when was that bardic sort of genealogy compiled then that got him back to that?
Oh, quite a long way. And I think this one might well have been done by a little old lady from Hereford.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And I like to imagine that I don't know if she was old. I know she was a lady and she lived in Hereford and she did it. And I like to imagine she was knitting as she produced this family tree. So they got to have legendary sort of ancestors. That's kind of, and heraldry was very important to the Welsh, even more than the English, really.
Yes.
Which was very interesting, the way it all drags all the way back. But little old lady in Hereford. But the thing was, this was put down as a Welsh family tree, and an English historian said, well, that's nonsense. Second son of Noah, nonsense. I've done my research, and it's quite clear that the Morgans of Tredegar are directly descended from the third son of Noah, which made far more sense, obviously. So we've got our forebears, sort of. What we need now, Goff, for this dynasty is a site upon which to base it.
Right.
And so the current site is this one. Now we are looking down a bird's eye view of that part of Newport.
Ah, there we are.
And right in the middle here where I'm going around is the current day Tredegar house.
Yeah.
So all of this here, this sinewy, serpentine housing estate of Dyffryn is indicative of how Newport has grown basically to encompass a country house. This was once in the countryside. You've got the avenue of oak trees disappearing over the brow of the hill. Now, this is far too modern for us, but usually, Goff, we show an historic map and then show the modern world encroaching upon it, don't we?
Yeah.
This time, we have the satisfaction of removing the modern world.
Oh, we're doing it the other way. Yeah.
So we'll start with a modern map, and we will go right back. And all of a sudden, Tredegar House is a country house once more.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's astonishing, isn't it, to realise how much things got completely sort of swamped and encroached on.
Look at this. I've noticed this before. This bit here, this little building, it's not still there, is it? Everyone keep an eye on that square. No, it's not. It's now part of the camping site because that says granary for the old forge.
Oh,
there was an old forge in the ground. The forges will come in our 17th century episode. I just got excited when I saw that. That's all.
Yeah, as Gibor Henavale.
So if we have a look here, there are a couple of things I want to show people, which will come up again and again. If we go up here, we have Gwerne Klepper, which is a long barrow, chambered long barrow site, Neolithic. So it dates from, what, 4,000 BC to 3,000 BC?
Oh, crikey.
So, very historic site.
Yeah.
And Gwerne Klepper actually became a home for a son of the Morgan family, you could say, Ivor Heil, Ivor the Generous, who basically had his own bard, one of the greatest of all bards, David Gwilym, who speaks of hawking at Gwerne Klepper and poetry and culture. And Ivor had paid him to say this. This is true.
Well, quite, yes.
Going way back, we have got Gwerne Klepper. And you know what, Goff? I never saw this before. I saw a document which suggested that King Charles I, before going to Rupera Castle, stayed at Gwerne Klepper House.
Oh, that's interesting, because I thought it was long gone by then.
Oh, no, it wasn't long gone, but I'm still surprised. No, it went in 1680.
Really?
When the Morgans finally got...
I thought it had gone a lot earlier than that. Oh,
no,
well, never.
It was leased out to various people. And the sad thing is, Gwerne Klepper House, when it was demolished and they sold it all off, it made, what did it make? £10, 10 shillings.
Oh, gosh.
So how the mighty have fallen. My point with this is a very ancient site.
Yeah.
You've got Gwerne Klepper nearby. Roman remains have been discovered in Tredegar Park. When they were doing the roads up here, they discovered what they saw as remnants. Of course, the roads aren't there on this map. How stupid are you, Busby?
No.
They discovered, 60s when they're building motorways, and they discovered the evidence of what they called a medieval village just to the north of the house.
Oh, yeah?
I suspect it was not a medieval village.
Oh.
I suspect it could well have been the Tredegar house before the present one.
Oh, yes, because we've often wondered where it went, aren't we? Yeah, the 1385, the building that's recorded being there in 1385. So it's actually to the north of the motorway.
Something is.
Something. Oh, how interesting.
Something was.
Yeah.
So we start already with a mystery. Also, I want to point out, I hope you're still following this. We've got kennels and smithy, and this is all still here. But if we go to the south, we find Pen Carn. I've often been asked where Pen Carn is.
Oh, yes.
There's a bit of me which thinks it might have been the home of Sir Henry Morgan growing up, although very few people agree with me. Unfortunately, Pen Carn, if we fast forward, bang, under houses.
Oh, gosh, yes, completely gone, yeah.
But we've still got all this bit.
Yeah.
And that's good. So we've still got Middle Pen Carn, at least where it was, and Great Pen Carn down here. Now, I hope Great Pen Carn was the ancestral home, because that would be handy. Because the person we're going to talk about first had a connection to Pen Carn, okay? So it's so close to Tredegar House, isn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Very near neighbour. Now, I want to talk, Goff. In the 1890s, I think, Lord Tredegar gave a speech in the park, and he said that he was quite proud because he had a saint buried in Tredegar Park. And he believed that St. Gladys, it was a mound, St. Gladys was buried in his walled Tredegar Park. Now, what this means is this touches the site on Arthurian legend as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes, yeah.
Now, you know, of course, about St. Gladys, Goff.
Oh, yes, St. Gladys was the wife of St. Woolus. In fact, she's believed that, and their son was St. Caddoc, who was a major figure as well. Woolus was Gwynllwg, as his real name was. Gwynllwg was a sort of warlord who basically converted to Christianity and then converted a lot of other people to Christianity by threatening to cut their heads off, sort of thing. So he never quite lost his ferociousness. But Caddoc had convinced him and St. Gladys to live an incredibly austere hermitage-type life, really. He abandoned all the earthly trappings and Gladys with him as well, and they lived in little cells on the top of of Stow Hill in Newport area, and Gladys and he would bathe au naturel in the various rivers. I think Gwynllwg would do the Usk every so often, where there's a pill where they think where he may have actually bathed, but also Gladys was on the side of the Ebu, wasn't she?
Yeah,
her little site where she would bathe, and a holy spring. The spring that she used to bathe in became referred to as St. Gladys's holy spring and was believed to have healing properties.
and we'll talk more about that when we get to the 18th century, but pertinent for this point.
What's a collection with sort of a Thuriana, though? What's that bit?
Well, the Arthuriana is the fact that in Lives of the Saints, which was at Llancarvan, which is near Cowbridge, probably about 1086, there were two versions of this. In the lives of various saints, including St. Caddoc and St. Gwynllwg, Gladys was seen as the daughter of one of the many daughters of King Bruchen from Brecconshire.
Yeah.
And
one of 25 daughters.
25. Do you know what? There's
the
one
legendary
document.
King Bruchen of Brecconshire, yeah.
There's one document which suggests he had 63. Which is getting.
Yeah, he bought a very good bard to get that.
A very good bard to get 63 daughters. But anyway, St. Humble old Gwynllwg at this point wanted to marry Gladys, and King Bruchen said no, and so basically he kidnapped or rescued her. And as he rescued her, he darted towards this part of the world where he was met by King Arthur.
Oh, yeah.
Who helped him, but not before King Arthur considered kidnapping Gladys himself because of her beauty.
Yeah.
So that's the legend, an Arthurian, and interesting, isn't it? Because if you go up here, where is it? Can I find it? Somewhere along here. Oh, God, it's all a bit... I can't.
Pull out a bit there.
It's still a bit... It's not quite clear in itself because I've been on this page for too long.
Right.
But there is a place... Oh, gosh. Everything's going a bit fuzzy now. But there is a place just up here called Maes Arthur. Arthur's Field.
Arthur's Field. Oh, well.
And although it isn't called Arthur's Field anymore, it's still there, and it's still exactly the same. Oh, there it is. Can you see that in the center of our screen?
Oh, yeah, Maes Arthur, yeah.
Maes Arthur. And look at the shape of it, and I'll show you Maes Arthur today. Still there.
But it hasn't.
It has not
changed at all.
At all.
How fascinating.
Now, there's always a chance that Maes Arthur could simply mean a bloke called Arthur owned this field, but it might not mean that.
No. But also, it sometimes you've got like that sort of backfilling they do. There's a place called Maes Arthur, so then they say, "Oh, King Arthur must have been here." So it's the other way. So it's the other way around. It wasn't necessarily named after him. Somebody Arthur was there, and then the story became attached because they believed it was a famous Arthur, as opposed to a everyday Arthur, shall we say?
But there was also another interesting thing. You mentioned a hermitage.
Yes.
Well, Gladys's hermitage was said to be at Pencarn.
Oh, right. I didn't know that.
Hence me bringing Pencarn into it.
Yeah. They had little cells around St. Stow Hill area as well originally. I think they moved about a bit. I think they put it around as saints. They went out there and did it and got everywhere. So, that's interesting. So you had a hermitage at Pencarn?
So we have a legend around this site, and this site called Tredegar. Now, why it's called Tredegar? Well, the satisfying answer is probably incorrect. The
Oh,
satisfying answer is that it's at the foot of an Iron Age hill fort, now known as the Gare. We did a podcast on the Gare House, if you remember. And Tredegar means feet of the fort, but it might have been Tredegar means foot of the fort, but it might have changed to Tredegar over the years.
Yeah.
Foot of the fort seems to make sense, except as a friend mentioned many years ago, and he's quite right when I think about it. If that is what it means, there's a lot of hill forts in Wales. Why aren't there more Tredigars?
Oh, yeah. Now I have a theory about this.
Okay.
Because it's also it's reclaimed land. Because remember, there's the seawall, so a lot of the land around this area, at the foot of the fort, is land that was reclaimed from very, very marshy salt marshes and area. So if that name came about after the land was reclaimed, then it suddenly becomes a signifier that it's the new land at the foot of the fort.
It's plausible.
That's what I've often thought about how it can, because as you say, why aren't there more foot of the fort places? Because there are loads of forts, but it becomes significant if it's new land, newly named.
Possibly, yeah. No, well, that makes sense, and that would be very satisfying. There's also another the way it's worded on a poem, the Sir John Morgan in the 15th century that we'll come to. It mentions him as Sir John Morgan, and they mention Tredegar, but the way they've actually put the capital letters suggests that it's Tredegar was Drefdigir, which basically means homestead of someone called Degir or Tegir. So again, is it foot of the fort, or is it the home place, the homestead, which is bigger than a house, which would explain what they found near the roundabouts? Yeah. So the place or homestead of Dagor or Tagor. Now we'll talk more about Dagor and Tagor and who they might be in our Arthurian episode, which we promised we would do. Yeah. But it just gets you thinking. We're not entirely sure, but we've got our site. We've got legends behind it. It's called Tredegar. Now we need a family upon which to actually live there that isn't in the Bible.
Yeah.
And we start with a very big character. Oh, first of all, do you want to have a little look at St. Gladys? Why shouldn't you want to have a little look at St. Gladys? There she is.
Ah. Oh, the white ox.
The white ox.
The white ox, a very significant thing. That was why the church St. Wallace was founded, where they see a white ox grazing, where the white ox is found to graze there. They should build a chapel, and that's
absolutely.
Yeah, that's why the white ox is so significant. That's why there's a huge ox statue with a bell on it in Newport, down at near the Usk Way at the
absolutely right.
Fields.
Now, what you won't hear for a while is us using the surname Morgan, because we're in the patronymic stage of Welsh history. It essentially means that your name, if you knew your ancestors, was a string of your ancestors.
Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly molded father to son. So you would use ap, son of, or vech, daughter of.
Oh, I didn't know the vech.
And your tree would carry on like that.
Yeah.
So they haven't settled on the branding, you might call it, of an anglicized surname at this point. But already at this point, Morgan is quite a magical name. There's lots of kings of Gwent have been called. There's Morgan the Generous. There was the very famous Morgan Hen, Morgan the Old. And Glamorgan itself, of course, Morganwg.
Yeah.
Land of Morgan.
Land of the Morgans.
So Morgan is a very special name.
It is. And also, I mean, it also, just before we finally abandon all this, the sort of the Arthuriana bit as well, one of the Morgans, the Lords of Clean, was also a Morgan ab Arthuris, around about the year 700, which is where, again, this sort of Arthuriana bit connects in our area.
Someone once wrote a letter to Evan Morgan, a 1930s, 40s Lord Tredegar, who was interested in the occult, who said, I know that you have secret powers. And Evan was very interested in this. He said, because, of course, Morgan means water sprite. And I believe all the Morgans are descended from a water sprite. There's legend and there's legend, Goff.
Yeah, as a Morgan, I have never, ever considered myself a water sprite. But the water connection with the name Morgan is Morgan actually means as shining as the sea.
Yeah, of the sea.
As brilliant as the sea. So the reflection of the sun on the water. So you can see where the watery element comes along.
We have someone, however, who was known as, we were in the 1270s, 1280s, where we really start our story, and we started with Sir Morgan ap Meredydd.
Yeah.
Sir Morgan ap Meredydd had a beef, quite frankly. He was in the long line of the native lords of Caerleon. And the Normans, as they often did, basically kicked out his father and his ancestors as lords of Caerleon. So Sir Morgan ap Meredydd really didn't like Gilbert de Clare. Gilbert de Clare was the Norman who built Caerphilly Castle, and he is really the arch enemy of the Morgans of these early years.
Wow.
Sir Morgan ap Meredydd loved a good rebellion. In fact, he was known as Morgan the Rebel.
Oh, right, yeah.
1283, he rebels on the side of Dafydd ap Gruffydd. That doesn't go so well. And in 1294, Madog ap Llywelyn rebels. And Sir Morgan ap Meredydd basically becomes the leader of the rebels in Glamorgan. And he's amazingly effective. He captured the castle of Kenfig, and he captured the castle of Llangibby, which we've done a podcast on, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
So he's quite the warrior. So he basically is Gilbert de Clare's worst enemy. Here's Gilbert de Clare, looking worried as if Sir Morgan is about to come over the hill at any possible moment.
Yeah. I'll just go and get my horse.
I'm sure I can hear Morgan's approaching. But this 1294 rebellion on the side of Madog ap Llywelyn, this fails as well. But Sir Morgan ap Meredydd says to this man, Patrick McGowan.
Oh, yes, what?
Perhaps the least accurate historical movie ever made, Braveheart. Patrick McGowan is playing Edward I here. You don't mess with Edward I.
No.
And Sir Morgan has essentially rebelled against him. But Morgan says to him, "Sire, I was not rebelling against you. I was rebelling against the Clare family."
Right.
This is a pattern that we will touch on lots throughout these videos. The Morgans think locally first.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And he wanted the old Caerleon lands returned. And unbelievably, Edward I agrees.
Oh, gosh, I
He
didn't
does
know.
not execute Sir Morgan ap Meredydd. Far from it. In fact, he makes Morgan his agent in South Wales, invites him to Flanders, where he becomes part of Edward I's household. So, however...
It's fascinating, isn't it? Particularly when he gives a lot of the local aristocrats, landowners, or whatever at the time, and then the chieftains and the area, they were generally displaced by Norman warlords who were put in as part of the conquest, weren't they? So to actually take on one of the local Welsh landowners is actually quite significant, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, Morgan the Rebel is. I can see. I think maybe they chose Morgan as a surname, possibly to do with Sir Morgan ap Meredydd. He was so well known as a warrior leader in Morgannwg and parts of Gwent as well. But anyway, nothing is quite as it seems, because a letter survives from the English traitor, Sir Thomas Turberville, who basically wanted France to invade England and take over. And he's writing to the French king, which is King Philip the Fair, that we've talked about in pubs about the Knights Templar.
Oh, yeah, he's a chap that had a pet pope and shut down the Knights Templar, yeah.
So Sir Thomas Turberville writes to him saying, "If you invade Scotland and Wales will rise. I have been told this by Sir Morgan ap Meredydd." Whether Morgan's paying lip service to Edward I, we're not entirely sure. Or it could be that Turberville is just over-egging the pudding a little bit.
Could be.
Because Morgan has no punishment from Edward I, and he's his agent in South Wales. So it is interesting how powerful this family appear to be even as far back as the 1280s and 1290s, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, it is fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating.
And by the way, an interesting point that, interesting to us at least, was, if you remember, Goff, Sir Morgan ap Meredydd, after the Templars were wiped out by Philip the Fair, who would have heard of Morgan ap Meredydd, he ends up getting Templar land, doesn't he? Little pocket of Templar land gets given to Morgan ap Meredydd. Yes,
that's right. We were looking at and trying to pin down what it was and where it was, weren't we? And I mean, did we
Chemist Commander, I think, wasn't
it? Chemist Commander. That was. Oh yeah. That's very, very intriguing, isn't it? That he gives him that. Because Philip the Fair was keeping a grip on all of that, really. So how did he get a little bit of Templar land?
I just like the fact that the King of France knows Morgan ap Meredydd. Whether he's been given the right information or not, we will never know. So we have our famous forebear, Sir Morgan ap Meredydd. We know he's in the area. And what we need now, of course, is we need a crest. And this was the initial crest of the family who later became Morgan. The griffin.
Well, that's very different from what we see nowadays, isn't it? Very
the
different.
Griffin, so you got part lion, part eagle. That's the ancient crest of the Morgan family. Now, what happens is Sir Morgan ap Meredydd dies in early 1330s, and his daughter Angharad, known again, thanks to the bards, as Angharad the Beautiful, again, you get what you pay for, is in her early 30s when she marries. And it's this marriage, from this point on, we can document the complete line of the Morgans of Tredegar. It comes from the marriage of Sir Morgan ap Meredydd's daughter Angharad the Beautiful, and a great landowner as the Lord of St. Clair's in Carmarthen, Llywelyn ap Ivor. So Llywelyn matches Angharad, and from that moment on, everything is documented as a family tree. No more myth.
That is a very, very late age for someone to marry in the 1300s, isn't it?
Well spotted,
I mean, because your life expectancy can be up to 40. So she only married 7 years before what was the life expectancy at the period, more or less. Average life expectancy. That is. And also, because, I mean, had she married before? Was it a second marriage?
Nope.
Well, how interesting.
You touched on the one point that historians of that era do find interesting, because she's also a great heiress. He has no sons. Isn't it? Yeah, so that's interesting. But also, we got to understand was the Welsh legal system still operating at that point? Because you were under the Norman heel, really.
Yeah, but the inheritance system was very.
Oh, yeah, the inheritance. Well, yeah.
So you wouldn't. She might have. She. Let's say, just to explain what I'm babbling on about. Under the Welsh legal system, every son and daughter inherited an equal portion of the estate on the death of their father. So it meant that you couldn't build up great land masses because everybody got a bit. Now, I mean, did he have? If he didn't have other children, however, and she was the sole heir, then she would have been in a very powerful position because she would have inherited all of his property. It wouldn't have been split up between other siblings. So she would have been a very, very wealthy woman in her own right. The inheritance going to the primogenitor, the firstborn son, is the Norman system.
Yeah,
which seems to have been adopted. I would say later on in the Morgans family, when they adopted the Norman patronymic system as well, the first name, the family name system that was done. So that's very interesting. I mean, it may be that she didn't marry because she was the sole heir to the estate.
Not entirely. Well, yeah,
because she didn't. They wouldn't have wanted, in a way, that I don't know what the. Because often there was that tendency at some point, but there was that whatever's the property the wife went to the husband. Perhaps they didn't want her inheritance going out to somebody.
There's also a human element. She only marries after her dad dies, as far as I can make out.
Oh, interesting.
Who knows what Morgan the Rebel was thinking of? But this coat of arms has nothing to do.
Was her mother around?
Oh, we don't have the records to suggest she was. No, by that point.
Well, you wonder then whether she might have been operating as sort of mistress of the estate as well.
Well, entirely possible. But she has nothing to do with this coat of arms. This is entirely her husband, Llywelyn ap Ivor, Lord of St. Clair's. And it's not very English or Welsh.
No.
Griffin is highly unusual. And according to Octavius Morgan, a name that you might hear, he was an antiquarian and the son of the famous Sir Charles Morgan, brother to the first Lord Tredegar as well. He's looked into a lot of this. And he found the College of Arms in 1589 suggests that these are actually the arms of a Spanish knight, and that Llywelyn ap Ivor slayed in one-on-one combat when he fought in Spain. So he slayed this man, and out of honor, he took the far more Spanish griffin as his coat of arms. And that was declared in 1589, which is, it's not that far, probably, 1430, maybe 250 years after the event. So anyway, it could be a legend, but that's the story.
Right, that's quite interesting in its own right as well, isn't it? Because obviously Spain was a big Templar area. So you wonder, did he bump off a Templar knight? It's interesting, isn't it?
Who knows?
Yeah.
So anyway, Angharad and Llywelyn ap Ifor, although, by the way, just throw in a little monkey wrench, which we won't be talking about, but Octavius did some work, and he actually believed that Llywelyn ap Ifor owned Tredegar all along. And it didn't come through Angharad and Sir Morgan ap Meredydd. And anyway, let's not get lost in the weeds.
No. Yeah.
But they had children, and we mentioned one of the children on our Saint Pierre podcast, because the eldest, who he named Morgan, took over what we think is somewhere on this site of Tredegar. The second son we've already talked about was Ifor Hael, who went to Gwyn y Clepper, great cultural centre. And then, of course, there was the pretentious one, Philip of Saint Pierre. Progenitor of the Lewis family that we talk about in there.
Identifying as a Norman, as we would say.
Identifying as a Norman, yeah. Now, fast forward, we go to 1402, and there's problem. I mean, there's another rebellion, and of course the Morgans join it, because that's what they do at this stage. Morgan the rebel's spirit lives on. And it's again, someone we've talked about in our Kent Church Court video, Owain Glendower. And Owain Glendower sweeps in, and the Morgans, Llywelyn ap Morgan, supports him. Now, it could be, actually, that in the absolute chaos and carnage of this, that ultimately was a failed rebellion, although it went very well for a very long period of time.
It ran for 14 years.
It ran for a long time.
And at its height, Wales was bigger under the control of Glendower than it is now. I mean, that's quite fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah. But as King Henry snapped back, and there's a legend about that as well, about Nant Pen Carn, if the freckled-faced man should pass over the brook of Nant Pen Carn, then Wales will fall. And he did, Pen Carn again. Pen Carn is very important. It's the place no one's heard of.
Who was the freckled face?
King Henry.
Oh, King Henry, was he? He was a bit freckly, was he?
He was a little bit freckly.
All right, yeah.
But so we got Owain Glendower. It could have been actually that whatever Tredegar house was around, and it would have been a wooden house probably in 1402 on a stone base, whether it's on the site of the present one or near where that motorway is now. Yeah. It may well have been destroyed because the value of the lordship after Glendower was nil.
Oh, interesting.
So it may have been destroyed. We don't know. There are very few stone houses built in 1402 in South Wales. But we need to make a little bit of a jump because they've taken a hit here, haven't they? Because Tredegar is apparently sequestrated at this point.
Yeah.
They finally decided that they're causing too much trouble, so the estate is taken off them. But they get back in using the greatest dynastic weapon of all, marriage.
Oh, right.
And what Llywelyn ap Morgan does to get back in the graces is that his son ends up marrying the niece of one of Glendower's enemies, Davi Gam.
Oh, yeah.
Davi Gam, who died at Agincourt.
Yeah.
Maybe Llywelyn was based on by Shakespeare in Henry V.
Yeah.
And so by marrying into a family known to despise Glendower, it seems to have got them back in good graces.
That's interesting.
You're always thinking strategically at this point, aren't you?
Well, yeah. Yeah, and dynastic marriage was the politics of the day as well. They're all political marriages, marriage alliances.
So if they are now settled somewhere at Tredegar, we go to a man now that we have talked about a bit in the past, Goff, and that is Sir John Morgan, or Sir John Morgan. So basically it's around about this time, although his son does produce the patronymic again, but his grandson seems to settle on the surname Morgan, which becomes a brand, really, doesn't it, to get on with the anglicised court.
Yeah.
Try to get on in society. Now, we've talked of Sir John Morgan quite a bit in the past. He was not lightweight, was he?
He was known as the Fat Knight, which I think is wonderful. I take a small exception with the interpretation that used to be in the servants' hall at Tredegar House, when they refer to him as the plum Knight. What a horrible word, lump.
What about stout? You all right with stout?
I'm happy. I don't mind stout, because stout could also be stout of heart as well. But no, he was fat. Hey, I'm a fat man. I'm a fat Morgan. I want more fat Morgans represented in the house. I'm staking my claim. Yeah, no, yeah, he was a large gentleman. He had his own poet, Gwilym Taw, which is sort of fat Gwilym, so fat knight and his fat poet. They went off on pilgrimage to the Holy Sepulchre in Rome.
Which is what you have here, Goff.
And off to Jerusalem as well. They were off to Jerusalem. So, I mean, they went all across Europe and back. So how long that must have taken him in a time? It must have taken a couple of years when he was on pilgrimage as well.
You could of course, you could buy a package, which I like package holidays. You get to the Holy Sepulchre, which is what you see on the screen now. This is about 1540s, so it's a generation or two away from Sir John's visit. Yeah. He was probably there in about 1448, with the added bonus is if you go there, you might get a knighthood. And he was knighted as a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre because of his visiting this. Yeah, I hope he didn't do any of the graffiti that famously aristocrats around Europe would do when they went to the Holy Sepulchre. But I do like the fact that you could, it's like a package, you could pick and they'd look after you and they'd take you there in the ship. Although the Venetians were a little bit the hard sell. They said, if you use anyone other than Venetian ships, expect to end up at the bottom of the sea.
Yeah.
Hard sell, isn't it?
Definitely a hard sell. Yeah, they weren't mucking about, were they?
So Sir John does go there.
I have stood in that courtyard.
Have you really?
I have been to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, and that courtyard area, it's very different now, the buildings around it, but that essentially square courtyard leading to the front of the church is still there. Yeah, so yeah, I did. So that's two fat Morgans at least who have been to the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. Yeah.
Well, Sir John was also known as the widespread wine of Wentlug.
The widespread wine of Wentlug.
For the longest time, I assumed that meant hospitality at Tredegar, possibly, or nearby. But actually, it appears to be, if you look at the Welsh translation, that it's more vine of influence. So the vine of the Morgans is starting to go right through the county of Gwent. Or the young kingdom of Gwent.
The widespread vine. How interesting. So what we would call networking, in a way.
Very much.
The network of influence that he built up. So he was how interesting.
And this probably looks nothing like him, but this is a Knight of the Holy Sepulchre.
Yeah. You might need to stretch the picture sideways a bit more.
Oh.
And I would like to point out, I am not fat shaming, I am fat claiming. I need representations of fat knights, please. That's what we need.
Well, this particular stout knight or fat knight was a very badly behaved local gentry. He was always getting into trouble with Edward IV's regime. And it really wasn't good. I mean, famously, in 1476, the Duke of Buckingham summoned him at the Great Session at Newport Castle. Duke of Buckingham owned Newport Castle, and they were summoned there and basically told you, very naughty, will you please stop? On pain of 500 marks penalty.
Yeah.
And it was the kind of thing where you were summoned to Newport Castle, and you basically, if you had a beef with anybody, you could exclaim it there and see what the Duke of Buckingham would do about it. But Sir John was causing all kinds of trouble in the area. Yeah. Younger Morgan's sons are often pretty badly behaved in these early years, wrecking Newport and various things. But Sir John was badly behaved. It might have been to do again with the fact that taxes flowed through and then didn't flow out of Tredegar.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
He was certainly chiseling at some point, Mr. John Morgan. Yeah. But if he was getting in trouble with the authorities of the day, there was hope. Because as we have heard already, there is one thing the Morgans cannot resist, however many times they fail at it: rebellion.
An uprising. Yeah, there's an uprising. Their uprising. Yeah.
And in 1485, this man had a plan.
Ha-ha.
Henry Tudor.
Yeah.
And he lands at Milford Haven, and he must have been extremely pleased to see one of the earliest supporters of Henry Tudor was Sir John Morgan of Tredegar.
Oh, no.
It turns out, and the reason why that's good is Sir John has, as the widespread wine of Wentlug, has connections with people that Henry knows he really needs at this point.
Yeah.
So if we believe that he is this big fat knight at the time, the sight of him wobbling towards you with his big fat bard was a sight from heaven
Yeah.
for Henry Tudor. And it is indeed likely that under the banner, although Octavius Morgan claims that his father Ian also fought at Bosworth Field, Ian would have to have been in his 80s, so it makes it unlikely.
Yeah.
But it's likely that Sir John did indeed fight at the Battle of Bosworth Field underneath this banner. This is the banner of Henry Tudor against Richard III.
Yeah.
So you've got, and if you notice his motto, "My God on my right," is still the motto of King Charles III to this day.
Yeah.
Now, it's always tricky at Tredegar House with Ricardians, or those fans of Richard III, of which there are many.
Yes.
Because Tredegar was definitely a Tudor Welsh supporting household.
Yeah.
I always like to say that, yes, it is true, unfortunately, that Sir John Morgan of Tredegar did help put Richard III underneath that car park in Leicester.
Not personally.
Well, he was there.
He didn't sneak in at the dead of night and pop him under there, yeah. But yes, he was perhaps involved in the general unpleasantness around the whole activity, yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it is. I mean, Henry Tudor's claim to be Welsh, which he used a lot to raise his Welsh supporters, is a wee tenuous, isn't it, really?
Yeah, he was born in Pembroke, but you're right. Among the Welsh, he was Welsh. Among in Brittany, he was,
He was French.
French,
he adapted whatever he was to suit whoever he was talking to at the time. But the difference is, whenever there is what you can say that perhaps the Morgans did chuck their lot in with the Tudors again because of that perception of them being another Welsh uprising. You know, whenever a Welsh person had tried to generally take over, do something unpleasant to England, they joined in. You know, and so I wonder whether that's another significant factor. Because again, they supported, you know, the uprising of the Welsh princes, the uprising of Glendower, and now the Tudors, when the Tudors came along, they chucked their lot in with them as well. Except it worked on this occasion, you know.
Well, they were absolutely right to, because they were awarded land in the manor of Bedwellty, which later became, although at the time it was worth very little, it later became the sort of heart of their industrial empire. And they were allowed to guide that by supporting Henry Tudor. And he's given all kinds of awards, Sir John Morgan, in the area. Although, as an historian, I just want to put a warning here. There were 3 John Morgans at the same time.
Oh.
So sometimes they get mixed up in the records.
Yeah.
But we think that he got very well rewarded. He certainly got Bedwellty, which was very valuable in future. He didn't know it at the time, but it certainly was. Of course, that does not stop Sir John merrily chiseling Henry Tudor.
That's the interesting thing about it, really, because one of the reputations about Henry VII was he had very close control of the purse strings. But apparently he was warned about John Morgan fiddling the local taxes. And he still, afterwards, as a reward, he still left him fiddling them. He just let him carry on. Yeah, all the taxes going into Tredegar House and none of the taxes coming out. You know,
it was said that Henry was very mindful of those that were with him at Bosworth. I wonder if that forgiving nature to John Morgan might not have been spread to others, shall we say.
Yeah,
but in the end, he did go too far. And according to the records, in 1491, Sir John Morgan was reprimanded accordingly.
Caught with his fingers in the jar.
But around about 1493, Sir John dies. He'd reached a ripe old age. The Morgans had got their little empire building very nicely. And this is part of what's left of his monument in now Newport Cathedral, St. Woolas Church, when this was put in. So we've got a little plaque here. There used to be more than this, I'm sure, underneath, but maybe it's been... Because you used to be able to see his little round stomach.
Well, you can just see that little bulge in the top there.
A little bulge.
That is popping up, that little pot belly.
And he's married to, again, Matthew of Llandaff. This is another local family. So now the Morgans are now a clan, and they're marrying into other clans. And their power over Gwent in particular is growing constantly, really. So we have now, we believe, either during his lifetime or shortly afterwards, a stone building is built at Tredegar House, of which a bit still survives. Do you think that's fair to say, Goff?
Yes. So you're talking about the 1490s building within the remains of the 1490s building within the house today?
Yeah. Now the Servants'
Yes.
Hall. And it was spotted
Servants'
by
Hall,
this man, John Leyland, who was a great antiquarian and the father of English local history. He was librarian to Henry VIII. And he passed by Tredegar House and called it a fair place of stone.
Fair place of stone. On his way there, of course, he went through Newport, which he referred to as mostly in ruin.
Yes. That could have been the Morgans' fault. Because in our St. Julian's podcast, we tell the tale of the Trinity Sunday riots.
Yeah. If he came through after that, yes, it would have been mostly in ruin.
Morgans and Herberts wreck in Newport in an argument over a dog. Click on St. Julian's and you'll get the full story from Goff.
Yeah. It's grubby.
Pretty grubby. What we have here, by the way, is what Goff said. It is now the Servants' Hall of Tredegar House, but it's the surviving stone wing, certainly with lots of Tudor aspects, but parts of it could be earlier. The dendrochronology, which we talked about in our Chepstow Castle podcast, dendrochronology is at wood time, basically. It's the age of the wood. Dates the primary beams from 1544 to 1574. But Octavius Morgan is convinced that there are parts of this wing which are older still.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, how many times are roofs replaced? So it's the age of the roof beams. It's not necessarily the age of the building, but it is the first concrete date in that part of the house. So you can say, because it's very difficult to say with any degree of certainty, really, when these things were actually put in. But that's the one fixed date we can say that roof beam was put in at that date. So that's why it's a significant date. But no, it doesn't necessarily reflect on the age of the building itself, age of the roof.
No, that's right. Now, I want to go through here because we're going to nip forward to the 1560s, 1550s, 1560s, where a man called William Morgan is living here. Now, this is the inside, much altered inside of what became the Servants' Hall of Tredegar House, hence these long tables. There are two fireplaces, one here and one down this way, and they are different ages.
Oh.
Now, that suggests at one time maybe it was, maybe two rooms. We can't be sure. But what we do know, because Octavius Morgan knew about this, he said in 1810 they repaved this floor. And originally, between the two fireplaces was a dais. So in this part of the room was a dais where you would expect the Morgans to be if this was the old hall of their Tredegar house.
Oh, yeah, because they would have, when you were dining in it, the family would sat elevated above the plebs, in a way. And at the top, they sat on a dais at the top and facing out. So they sat behind a table and faced out down the length of the hall. That's a part of it. It was a sort of a power statement, basically. And they had the best crockery and the best glassware and the best cutlery in use at the time. And then below the dais area, things were a lot more simple, a lot good quality possibly, but not the top quality that you got at what is now referred to as the top table. That's where the
interesting you mentioned that. Not so much crockery, because even when the 17th century house was built, there wasn't very little crockery. It was all pewter.
Yes.
So it's an interesting thing. But also, it's not just eating, although it would have been way back, the time of Sir John. By the time of William Morgan, you probably had, as a local magistrate, his wonderfully named chair of justice would have been somewhere here.
Oh, yeah.
And what he would do, sat in his chair of justice, he would dispense justice throughout the county. Usually a pre-trial kind of thing, in all honesty. Yeah. But he had a problem.
Interesting how the house was never named a court, though, because secretly places are called court.
True,
because
true.
Where courts were held.
Yeah,
It's never called Tredegar Court. It's called Tredegar.
To be honest, they always had bigger ambitions, I think.
Yeah. But it was not referred to most. What is it referred to at this period? Because it's not Tredegar Park at this period. That's later, isn't it?
It's just known in the documents I've seen now, the mansion house known as Tredegar, spelt with a Y.
Oh, interesting.
Tredegar. So imagine William sat there. He's had a disastrous personal life, quite frankly. He hasn't had any kids with his wife, and he's been wildly unfaithful to her with one of the straddling daughters from St. Donat's Castle. And he has illegitimate children, but no legitimate heir. But he sits there on his chair and he dispenses justice. But the English crown have a problem with pirates at this point. There are pirates everywhere, and they appear to be attacking out of Cardiff, Penarth, and Newport in particular. And the most famous one of all is John Callis. No one can catch this ruthless pirate. And he seems to have connections, because every time they turn up at places like Tredegar House, they get given the silent treatment by the magistrates.
Oh, doesn't it?
Because William is, of course, involved in the piracy.
Yeah, he owned the ships, I think.
Well, he certainly had something. It's interesting that John Callis's brother-in-law, this is John Callis, by the way.
Oh,
it's not really. It's just I saw an article online about John Callis, and this was the picture they chose. So who am I to go against it? John Callis was ruthless. He would shoot you in the leg. So you tell him basically where the treasure is, or he'll shoot other bits of you.
Yeah.
And he was known as utterly ruthless. And he was an unusual thing, a pirate that reached a good age.
Oh.
And never really retired. He would do things, he would usually sell his stock far away from where he stole it, which is interesting, Milford Haven usually. And he would attack out of Cardiff, attack out of Newport, and he was the one, Callis, that they all wanted to catch. But they were not going to get any help from William Morgan of Tredegar on this, were they?
No.
Because he was involved. And more importantly, perhaps, Callis's father-in-law was Nicholas Herbert. So Herbert means he had aristocratic connections, which probably was quite a nice, cozy deal for the South Wales gentry.
Yeah, yeah.
But Callis, well, I love that his ship, he had two ships, one was called the Cost Me Naught. Basically, he stole it. His more famous ship was called the Swallow, which he stole from a Scottish merchant. And one report says that they eventually caught him, and when they caught him, he offered to give as much information as possible to catch all the other pirates. I'll tell you anything, Gov.
Yeah.
Anything.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's terrible.
Are you now, or have you at any time been a pirate?
Everyone knows he was a pirate, but he was going to tell you where all the other ones were.
All the other ones were.
Poacher turned gamekeeper.
Yeah. He was a pirate as well, yeah, him and his wife.
Yeah, he was. Little children, lots of pirates.
Yeah. Potential pirates. They were.
Anyway, according to one report I saw, they eventually caught him and they eventually hanged him at Newport.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh.
However, the story might not quite end there, I'm pleased to say.
What?
At the time, Tredegar was taken over. As I said, he had no legitimate children. Let's go back to his place. William Morgan had no legitimate children, but he did have an illegitimate children with the Stradlin lady.
Yeah.
One of which was called John Morgan of the Cross House, which was in Newport. And he set him up there. And William Morgan hated one thing above all others. He loathed his cousin from Plasmachan. He loathed Roland Morgan.
Oh.
The passion and the heat of 1,000 suns. Now, whether it's because Roland was Catholic or merely that William loathed Roland, he was absolutely certain that no matter what happened, Roland would not succeed to the Tredegar estate.
Yeah, because Roland was the legitimate heir to the estate, wasn't he?
Absolutely.
And that's when it should have gone to.
Absolutely. And this is, we're in the 1569.
Wasn't he also steward of the estate as well, Roland?
Not quite yet.
Oh, right.
What happens is that William arranges for his illegitimate grandson, Miles Morgan, to inherit. He somehow gets away with it. Miles does inherit. And Miles starts as a daring character, and he spends money on Tredegar House. He probably adds to this stone building. But some of his ventures go wrong. So wrong, in fact, that he finds himself over £800 in debt. £800, 13 shillings and sixpence. That's a massive debt.
Oh, yeah.
For the 1570s.
Yeah.
So Miles simply does not know what to do. The house is mortgaged at one point. Tredegar House gets mortgaged. It gets seized of. He is called an outlaw for his negligence because of this immense amount of debt. And he needs, as the Americans would call it, a Hail Mary pass. He needs something to go right. And about that time, he starts talking to a friend of his. Not John Callis, but Sir Humphrey Gilbert, the explorer. And Sir Humphrey Gilbert, after a few years of attempting it, has got permission from the Queen to basically claim anything that isn't Spanish in the New World.
All right.
If you meet the Spanish,
Yeah.
give them a bloody nose.
Yeah.
That was, that wasn't mentioned, but that was. So Humphrey Gilbert suggests to Miles, why don't you fit up a ship and join me on this adventure? You'll get all your money back. You'll be rich by the time you get back. And Miles thinks, well, this is a tremendous idea. And so what they do is, they do indeed. They get men together. Miles Morgan, who, by the way, is High Sheriff of Monmouthshire with this terrible debt. High Sheriff of Monmouthshire. He sets up his own ship called the Red Lion of Newport. It weighs in 110 tons. He has 53 sailors and soldiers. The names are interesting. His mate is called Reese Sparrow. I like the fact there's a sparrow on board this ship.
Yeah.
Another person was called Black Robin. I mean, these are all ex-pirates. Some of these are ex-pirate vessels,
Oh, my goodness me.
But also on his, he has names like Herbert, Matthew, Bradney. So Gwent gentry are joining. Yeah. Well, by this point, it's Monmouthshire gentry are joining the cause. So a mix of pirates, bloodthirsty pirates, and South Wales gentry are going to be on the Red Lion of Newport to get Miles' fortune back. Yeah. That's the plan, at least. Plans don't often go right. And if we can actually have a look at some of the ships, Gilbert himself takes the Anne Arga. There's the Hope. There's the Falcon that was commanded by this man, Walter Raleigh.
Oh, right. Oh,
gosh. The half-brother of Sir Humphrey Gilbert. His ship, the Falcon, was paid for by this woman.
Oh, I mean.
Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth I. So you can see really that when they're saying it's just, we shall plant our people in the New World, it's basically really have a go at, these are pirates, basically.
Yeah, well, yes. Yeah.
And there's one pirate that was also unbelievably involved, because we have the Elephant ship, the Squirrel ship, the Red Lion, and the Swallow. The Swallow, of course, was old John Callis's ship, which we were pretty sure he was hanged at Newport.
Of course, yes. Oh, goodness, yeah.
Except, oh, by the way, Miles's ship had its motto as now or never.
Yeah. Unfortunate in light of what comes next.
Which is about right. But according to the historian Matthew Lyons, John Callis was not hanged at Newport, but on the 14th of July, 1578, was released and joined the crew of Humphrey Gilbert and Miles Morgan for another bash at the Spanish and loot and booty and unbelievable.
Oh, right, blimey. That's it. So he was imprisoned at Newport and then they let him out.
They let him go.
Back on the Swallow, and I think, oh my goodness.
Back on the Swallow. Yeah. Miles Morgan had a problem, however, by this man who even looks irritating in alabaster form. There's another ship commander, Sir Henry Knowles, who through the Boleyns was related to Queen Elizabeth, so tread carefully. Henry Knowles was annoying. He met up with Humphrey Gilbert and said, I am worth 20 of you.
Oh, really?
He was a strutting peacock of a man. And you know who he hated more than Humphrey Gilbert? Miles Morgan of Tredegar.
Oh, no. Oh, dear.
I don't know what Miles did to him. It might have been that Morgan rebellious spirit. He probably said something, but Sir Henry decided the only possible response was to hang Miles Morgan on his ship.
Oh, my God.
This was only stopped by Humphrey Gilbert coming back from London just in time to stop him. Yeah. So it has to be said that this voyage does. I mean, in the end, Knowles had enough. He said, "Oh, I'm not going with you," and he went off with a couple of ships to do a bit of piracy.
Oh.
Never mind planting our people in the New World. I've had enough of this.
Yeah.
But finally, after bad weather, on the 19th of November, 1578, the Red Lion of Newport, which sounds indeed like a floating pub, Miles Morgan and the Swallow and Raleigh and Gilbert, and they headed off to the New World.
Yeah.
It was a bit rough.
And a lammy stock photo. Hurrah!
A lammy stock photo.
A little bit rough, was it? Yeah.
Miles had a bard called David Benwyn, and David Benwyn's work survives. And David Benwyn is constantly saying, "Don't go to the sea. Whatever you do, Don't go to the sea. It gets more and more shrill as the poetry goes on. Do not go to the sea.
Yeah, I've got a bad feeling about this one.
Of course he has, because if anything happens to Miles, he loses his patron.
Yeah,
He loses his patron.
yeah. Stay home with us where it's safe and listen to some more poetry.
You've used that line in your past, haven't you?
I've written a lovely one telling people how marvelous you are.
Unfortunately, they all get blown back, and Gilbert ends up in an Irish port, I believe. Raleigh makes it as far as the Canary Isles and does try to get to the New World, but has to turn back. Miles Morgan knows this is a disaster and decides he needs to make money now. So he appears to sail towards Knowles's ships, and they do a spot of piracy. So a new venture for Miles.
Yeah. Oh
he
my
does
God.
become a pirate. And how do we know this? Because the Spanish king is not happy.
Right.
And the letters survive and document what Miles did.
Oh, right. I never knew
French
this.
ships travelling from Spain to Le Havre with wool and linen cloth on board called the Marie and the Marguerite were attacked and captured by ships belonging to Knowles and Miles Morgan. £2,700 worth of gear was taken.
My goodness.
Some of these spoils,
£800 debt.
well, quite. A lot of these spoils were put aboard the Red Lion of Newport. But the Red Lion did not make it home. But they also actually accused them of sacking a village and despoiling a church. Pretty tough. Anyway, the one ship that didn't make it home was, of course, the Red Lion
of Newport. Oh my gosh. That's interesting, that the land bit, because a lot of privateers were operated under a sort of charter. You were allowed to sack enemy shipping, but you weren't allowed to attack land with towns and things like this. Because Henry Morgan eventually gets into trouble with this later on, with this after the siege of Panama and what have you. So it's interesting that if the Red Lion and Newport did do that, you can't even claim, oh no, we were operating on behalf of the crown. Oh no, we were privateers. No, you weren't. No, you were quite definitely pirates, attacking and sacking coastal towns.
Desperation for cash, I guess, made him follow his arch enemy Knowles. It's interesting, but yeah, the Red Lion went to the bottom of the sea. It's very interesting to me that on Stow Hill in Newport there is I think it used to be Bainswell Social Club. It's called the Cross House because it's on the site of the Cross House.
Yeah.
But directly adjacent is a pub called the Red Lion.
That's right.
A lovely little in-joke.
The Red Lion in Newport.
Lovely little in-joke, accidentally done, I would have thought.
Yeah.
So Miles is dead. John Callis survives. Carries on.
Being vile. Oh my goodness.
So he is. So basically, Elizabeth.
The Red Lion of Newport sink. Do we know?
It's lost with all hands.
So it's lost. Is it attacked and sunk, or does it just go down?
We don't know. If it was attacked, it would have made it into ambassadors' documents, dispatches at some. I think it's just the weather got it. Probably because it was laid down with all of that cloth and linen and stuff.
It was it might have been low in the water.
Maybe. Anyway, Miles is dead, so now or never was, well, never, really.
Yeah.
So he dies at a young age. Very interesting. Humphrey Gilbert in 1583 does actually get to Newfoundland. So he's seen as the progenitor of the British Empire, Humphrey Gilbert. But after the loss of all these Welsh gentlemen on the Red Lion, very interesting that there is no subscriptions from the Welsh for Humphrey Gilbert's next attempt, apart from Sir William Morgan of Pencoed. Everybody else says, no, I'm sorry, we lost our sons on this.
Yeah.
Not trusting Gilbert.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So a lot of the Monmouthshire gentry, pardon me, stand up, my back's hurting. The Monmouthshire gentry then must have been reasonably stripped out of convenient sons to marry into other families then. Oh, well.
Okay.
Must have been quite a disaster in dynastic terms to have lost a whole
quite a few
proportional marriage bargains. Good Lord.
Now, the problem of what happens to Miles's Tredegar estate afterwards is it all comes down to old William's will. And William said, of course, that he didn't want Roland to take over. So he said that if Miles dies without children, it would go to the Herberts of St. Julian's.
Julian's.
Now, we've talked about this.
Yeah.
Two of the kids in line to inherit the estate died eating poisoned food, which was actually a big tragedy, we discovered, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
It was actually rat poison put down for the rats and devastated the Herberts of St. Julian's. And another one died young. So there's a lot of what happens to Miles Morgan's estate now. Well, they all gather at St. Julian's house to work out what's going on.
All right.
At this point, Miles has been, basically Elizabeth is using his outlawry to say to the Spanish, look, he's an outlaw. But really he was outlawed for debt rather than piracy.
Yeah.
So the estate is sequestrated, but no one's done anything about it. I think they hired a man called Philip Maddox of Mendelgeef, who'd done an inventory of Tredegar House. And when they asked him what was in it, he said, "Oh, I don't know. I can't remember. Oh, I remember there was a salt. But apart from that, not a clue.
No,
not very cooperative.
The conspiracy of I don't know. It was called, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was.
Yeah.
So eventually they're not sure. I mean, the Herberts can't really claim it. So it does kind of go towards the Machen Morgans. And it's eventually settled by an enormous payment. One of them, Roland's son, Thomas, was a lawyer. A good man to have when legal problems here. This is Machen, Plas Machen.
Plas Machen, yeah.
And basically they say, we'll pay you a fee and we'll end the dispute. And for the fee, 1584, they pay £5,564. And Tredegar House and the estate passes to the Machen Morgan cousins.
Gosh, that's a large amount of dosh.
Isn't it? Because £800 sent Miles to sea, didn't it?
Well, yeah, it's saying that £800 getting rendered an outlaw and sent to sea and clear and in desperate, turning into desperate measures. And but blimey, an that's 40 times the amount. Good Lord.
By the way, this is what Plas Machen looks like today.
Yeah.
In the early 19th century, a lot of it was knocked down. So this is it in its reduced state. Yeah. It's still rather splendid, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a lovely place, yeah.
And when the Morgans did inherit Tredegar, Morgans of Machen inherited Tredegar, the cousins, this house was kept for quite a while for the eldest son.
Oh, right. Yeah.
As you know, a role which was later played by Rupera Castle.
Rupera Castle, yes, that's right.
And then this became a farmhouse, which actually has survived better than poor old Rupera Castle.
Well, quite, yeah, it has, yeah.
So this is, again, we have to, as we go towards the end now, a familiar painting for you, Goff, of old Sir William Morgan. This is the next generation on. Yeah. Another old Sir William Morgan. There's lots of Williams and Charleses in our tale.
It gets very confusing.
But if you look up here at the crest, you can see that he is still using the original one in the 1600s.
Oh, yeah.
But the reindeer head has added to it.
Yeah, the stag's head's cropped up above. Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
This is a memento mori. He is alive when it's taken, but he's on the verge of death, really. That's what the skull is.
Yeah.
This is the oldest image we have of a Morgan of Tredegar, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it is. And also, he's the oldest Morgan of Tredegar because he lived to 93.
Yeah.
That is why they put a skull in it to remind him he had to go one day. Twice the natural life expectancy at the time. That's just phenomenal, isn't it?
He was extremely old. He may not quite have been as old as they claim, because if you look at his university entrance dates, it suggests that he might have been in his late 80s when he died rather than 93. But you need to remember that this is the time where people would lie about their age in the other direction. Remember the Methuselah of Raglan Castle, who claimed that he was 80-odd and he died at 62, I think.
Yeah. That's that's interesting, isn't it? I didn't read that. Yeah, I never realised that.
What do you remember? Did you remember anything about old Sir William? Because he used to be in the gilt room at Tredegar House, didn't he?
He was always. There's always that debate as to whether he'd lost a finger or not, because that glove looks peculiar.
I think he's just marking the page.
Yeah, I think it's just a slightly rubbishy drawing. But there does seem to be a ridiculous gap between thumb and finger there, so perhaps he might have only I'd suggest he had that. His big claim to fame was he crops up during the English Civil War, isn't it?
Exactly.
And at the time, because they were the Morgan family were moderate royalists at the time, which they were Protestant families who supported the rights of king over Parliament. So obviously they were on the side of Charles I for a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And he does become Charles I rolls up to the house after the Battle of Naseby, which is a total disaster for the royalists. And he decides to rally his Welsh supporters in the marches. And he starts off at Tredegar House pops across to Cardiff, come back to Tredegar House, and then heads his way up, Rupera Castle.
Gwynna Klepper as well, apparently.
Gwynna Klepper, Rupera Castle, and then up to places like Llancarchfawr, and eventually he pops out right at the top of Wales at Chirk Castle. So he works all the way right up through the borders. It was the worst PR campaign, royal PR campaign, probably since Prince Andrew, I should imagine. Yeah, because everywhere he turned up, as soon as he left, they changed sides because he was personally a great disappointment. It's very strange because obviously there was still this idea that obviously the divinely appointed king would somehow be an awe-inspiring, semi-divine figure himself. And Charles I rolled up, and he was a little short, bandy-legged bloke who wasn't very prepossessing. So it was a factor in it. It may not have been the only factor, but it was a factor in it that personally he didn't have the charisma to sway the people he was trying to sway. I don't think the Morgans did change sides, but they certainly managed to sit on the fence a bit. You have an well there, Mr. Busby.
I have an well. I have a few things because the Morgans, as we know, have gone through all these rebellions. Some worked, well, one worked.
Yeah.
The rest didn't. But they're pretty cautious at this point because, they've managed to build this sort of empire in Southeast Wales. You don't want to wreck it all, do you?
No.
So Sir William is lucky because he's old. Yeah. So he doesn't have to take part in the Civil War. He does what he's told by the local authorities. He seizes guns and whatever from houses, but he does only really what he's told. And a lot of that is to do with religion.
Yeah.
Although as a young man, he may have had Catholic sympathies, and he was in trouble with brawling in the streets, and Star Chamber got involved, and the usual Morgan bad behavior. He became an ultra-Protestant by the time of the Civil War. Part of that might have been, but part of it might have been the rivalry with the Raglan Castle Catholic Somerset Marquis of Worcester family. It was, later Dukes of Beaufort.
It's interesting as we discovered, that Monmouthshire is a Catholic stronghold, really. So that's quite interesting. He's flowing against the trend of the other gentry there.
So much so, you mentioned, you made an allusion to Joseph McCarthy earlier on. Have you ever been a member? Well, it was very McCarthyite what he did to the Catholics. He made a list of known Catholics in Monmouthshire and declared them, including his own cousins, the Morgans of Llantarnam.
Oh, God. Oh.
Now, this is a very good thing to do if you want to get on the right side of Cromwell and the parliamentarians. So he's paying lip service to the royalists, it would appear, but he really hates Raglan, really hates the Somersets at Raglan Castle.
Strange.
But he has parliamentarian sympathising sons, and he has a royalist Catholic son from his second marriage called Sir Anthony Morgan, who was here at Edge Hill, the Battle of Edge Hill in 1642 as a cavalier, and was knighted at Edge Hill. I should point out that such was the chaos, Charles I at Edge Hill did in fact knight two of the wrong people.
Oh, God.
So if you pass in, if you're the post boy, you might get a sword on the shoulders. Just take it. Take it and run.
Getting a bit of knight crazy there. He's knighting everyone. It's gone to his head a bit,
But you're right. I mean, at Edge Hill, it's one thing. So in later years, Sir Anthony Morgan, this Catholic royalist, was not in old Sir William's will at all.
Oh.
Cut him out completely. Too dangerous. So he's basically the worst possible man to turn up at Tredegar House when you're trying to sit on the fence a bit.
Yeah.
In 1645 is this man.
Hmm.
So Charles I turns up, as Goff has said, and they look after him and then send him on his way to Rupera, Cardiff Castle, then to Rupera via Gwynna Klepper. And it's quite big because this is the only real reigning monarch that has ever sort of slept at Tredegar House, King Charles I.
Yeah.
So the old part of it.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, they were never. Lots of people, a couple were planning and turning up and never got there. That was it.
Absolutely right. I'm really disappointed that your favourite monarch in 1,000 years of history, Edward VII, was supposed to stay at Tredegar House and in the end didn't, which was a real blow. Goff, by the way, has played Edward VII in a murder mystery at Tredegar House.
Twice.
Was it twice?
Yeah. Yeah, I like to. If I'm writing a murder mystery, I just write the parts I like to play. I'm going to be Chesterton at some point, I decided.
Chesterton would be great. But Sir
Yeah,
William's...
he's an unfortunate. It's a difficult time for William at this point, isn't it? It's not his careful plan of managing to sort of, in a way, rat everybody out.
Oh, that's the Sir Trevor Williams plan. Sir Trevor Williams of Llangibby was the weather vane.
Oh, right,
He's related to the Morgans, and Sir Trevor Williams was parliamentarian royalist clubman.
Yeah,
Talk about clubman in our Llangibby podcast. Do go and have a little look.
Yeah.
But there is one point now, Goff. This used to be your favourite story about old Sir William, and it's been so long since you've had a chance to say it. It was actually about Sir Trevor Williams rather than Sir William Morgan. But at one point, it was decided that they were hinderers.
Oh.
And the king had decided that they might need to execute them. And there were tears involved.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, apparently William was so upset, the story went, at the prospect of being executed, because he was in his 90s, that the idea that they just let him off. They went, oh, God, he's the only man ever to be too upset to be executed.
Which was either him or Sir Trevor Williams. Right.
I don't know what we know of Sir Trevor Williams. It probably sounds a bit more like him.
Yeah, well, quite.
Weaselly, wasn't he, Trevor Williams? But William a bit upset at the idea. That was the story they used to have. Yeah.
But anyway, we do have international.
He was referred to, though, as the malignant William Morgan.
Yes, he was.
When the parliamentarians took Newport, wasn't he?
He was, but to be fair, the poor old boy hadn't done anything, really. Oh. And he was only against... Again, isn't that interesting? His defence is essentially, I'm against Raglan. That's the same defence that Morgan the Rebel made in the 13th century against Gilbert de Clare.
I'm not against you, I'm against de Clare. He said, I'm not against you, I'm against Raglan, Lord Raglan. Yeah,
it's the local. It's interesting.
The local element, yeah.
Anyway, he had a son, Thomas Morgan of Machen, and Thomas Morgan of Machen really did seem to go over to Parliament.
Yeah.
Because he was arrested by the Royalists as the hinderer. Again, hinderer, they love that word.
Yeah.
Hinderer of the relief of Hereford. A lot of this is to do with religion, because Thomas Morgan refused to serve under Edward Herbert early in the Civil War because he was a Catholic.
Oh, right.
All this helps the Morgans. This is probably why the religious aspect is why, and a bit of stability is probably why the Morgans don't have their estate sequestrated after Charles I is executed in 1649, and we get the Cromwellian protectorate. Yeah. In fact, Thomas Morgan sits in the Parliament in 1654.
Oh, interesting.
In the protectorate Parliament.
Wow.
But of course, Goff, you see, the thing is, although Cromwell is in charge, there's another man out there somewhere, isn't there? And that other man is the Prince of Wales, and he is out there somewhere. And what happens if the king comes back and Cromwell goes? You need to sit on that fence again, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is what the Morgans appear to have done. One eye on Holland.
Yeah.
Where Charles II is, just in case he comes back.
Yeah.
Which brings us to, again, you see another little bit of the old stone Tredegar house of Sir William Morgan, where King Charles I stayed, well, at some point there anyway. And this is a spoiler, really, isn't it?
Yes. Spoilers, everybody. Yeah, that's the wing of the stone of the brick building, which we shall be looking at in a future episode.
So I don't know how we managed to get through. This is the thing, if you've just clicked on this in a leisurely fashion, thinking, I'd like to know something about Tredegar House, you're probably looking in horror now that we haven't actually yet reached the Tredegar House you know of.
Oh, yeah, quite, yes.
I did warn you.
Well, it's part of the puzzle of this family, isn't it? Is that they were so rooted within this area for such an incredibly long time. And as you said, they had that very, very solid local focus, which you even pick up in the 19th century. When we get there, you'll find where they talk about their roots within an area. Obviously their antecedents do not go all the way back to the second son of Noah, but I mean,
little old lady in Hereford.
Oh, bless her, little lady in Hereford. But it's like, they do go back into the Dark Ages, at least. So you're looking at, Morgans floating around as you know, I said right into the 700s or more. I mean, Courtney, the third Lord Tredegar, was at a coal commission inquiry, and he said that there was land that they broke into three types: inherited, purchased, and owned prior to 1066. So that is what I
could be a tax dodge, that couldn't it?
Well, dodging Edward the First. But no, I think it's just that they're this is why there's so much to talk about them. This is why it's going to take 3 episodes, because we're near even halfway through. You know, you're at the start. This is a family that has clung on in this area for countless centuries already. But now this is where it's going to take off, because they finally perhaps backed the right side.
I was going to ask you, can you, Goff, and this is very unfair to spring on you, without giving away any spoilers, what do you think people can look forward to in our 17th and 18th and early 19th century episode? What can they expect?
You can expect a very good marriage alliance that connects them with major aristocratic figures. You have all the Georgian ribaldry of horse racing and cockfighting. We have, documented servants, which are very interesting to talk about as well, and and ultimately a very, very notorious court case that almost brings them down, and ultimately the end of the Morgans.
Watch this space.
Watch this space.
We will be back. I don't know if we will be back next with that, or whether we'll do another property and then, do part 2 of the Morgans further down the line. But it's a little teaser, this one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And
part 1 over.
Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you as ever, Goff. Usually we just talk about this sort of thing in pubs. We'll probably talk more about this in the pub.
Yep.
But for those of you who've joined us, thank you very much. And thank you for subscribing, which we're now doing pretty well. And we will be back very soon with more. Yeah. So thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.